Honda launched their first production hybrid in December 1999 for the North American market. 20 years and 2 generations later, the Insight has grown quite a lot in size and in functionality. Our spotlight is on this 2019 Honda Insight Hybrid Touring. With an MSRP under $32,000 Canadian, doesn't offer enough to sway customers away from the excellent Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid. The thesis of this episode is this is the Honda Civic that we deserve, but is it the Honda that we need? That's what we're going to be talking about here today. Now, first off, why I say this is the Civic that we need. It is pretty much identical in size to the current generation Honda Civic. In fact, it's pretty much based on the Honda Civic. And if you think about this, this is the Honda Civic Hybrid, even though they have a different name for it. But pretty much all the important measurements are about the same, especially when it comes to the cargo volume in the trunk. It is the same as the Civic. Things like the width, height, and length are pretty much on par. And it's things just like the rear legroom that changes a little bit with this over the Civic. So you have slightly better dimensions with the Civic in a few small areas, but for the most part, they are pretty much the same size. Length on this is actually a little bit longer, which is interesting, but the rest of the important stuff is pretty much on par between this and the Civic. So if you wanted a hybrid Civic, here's your option. Now here's why I say that it is not necessarily the Honda that we need. I feel that this car is coming just a little too late. If you take a look at the sales for vehicles sold here in Quebec especially, hybrids, non-plug-ins and non-electric vehicles have dramatically decreased in 2019. Last year, a vehicle like the Kia Niro Hybrid was the hottest car, along with something like the new Hyundai Ioniq. But this year, now that there are more PHEVs and electric vehicles to choose from, specifically from the South Korean manufacturers, people aren't necessarily looking at the regular old hybrids anymore. They just don't make quite as much sense as they used to a couple years ago. And the Insight never saw similar sales to something like the Toyota Prius. That vehicle sold exponentially well, especially in places like California. But even here today, you can see lots of Priuses on the road and very few Insights. And they've pretty much changed every single generation. The Insight used to be a two-door little coupe thing. It looked more like a 90s Civic bubble. And then they came out with a slightly larger version of it for the second generation. And now, I think this formula works. If this is always how the Insight was, it probably would have been the best. Now, it isn't as fuel efficient as that first generation because it is a bigger vehicle, but again, it is going to be more fuel efficient than the Honda Civic. But this uses Honda's 1.5 liter Atkinson cycle inline 4. Total system output is 151 horsepower, 197 pound-feet of torque. It is slightly less power than you can get on the Honda Civic Touring, which for this video we're going to be comparing it in spirit because they are pretty much about the same price. The electric motor powers the front wheels directly, and the fuel motor can connect to the drive axles via a lock-up clutch. Now, I've been driving this for almost a week now, and I can tell you that more often than not, that will happen, where the engine will actually power the front wheels. Not so much so when we drove something like the Chevrolet Volt, which more specifically focused on powering the electric motor rather than driving the front wheels with the gas one. The Insight also has a fully independent suspension, McPherson struts on the front, a multi-link rear suspension on the back, and liquid sealing compliance bushings at both ends on the Touring trim. So if you get the base hybrid, you don't get that. The engine is assembled in Anna, Ohio, the battery in Marysville, Ohio, and the vehicle itself is put together in Greensburg, Indiana. So this is a US assembled vehicle, could be important for some buyers in the States. Now the batteries are mounted underneath the rear seats, which gives you still the same 428 liters of trunk space that you would get on the regular Civic. Interior passenger volume is 2,764 liters, a little bit less than you would get on the Civic, but still very good for a compact car. The Touring model adds chrome door handles, a moonroof, and rain-sensing wipers. Standard features on the Insight include LED daytime running lights with LED headlights and high beams, brake lights and taillights, Honda Lane Watch, collision mitigation, forward collision alert, lane departure alert, road departure mitigation, adaptive cruise control with low speed follow, lane keep assist, traffic sign recognition, a proximity key, and a remote preconditioner, so you can pretty much start the engine if the conditions are met to precondition the climate on the inside of the vehicle. And aside from that, from a looks department, is pretty similar to the current generation Civic. Back end is different, and in my opinion, looks better. This really is the Civic, again, that we would deserve if you needed a hybrid, non-plug-in vehicle. But again, is it better than something like the Clarity? Is there a reason to buy this over a Clarity besides the fact that it is cheaper? Because if you live in a place like Ontario where the rebates on an electric or a plug-in hybrid vehicle just aren't as good as they are here in Quebec, then maybe this would be more cost-effective in the short term. But we're going to jump inside now and talk about the features there and then go over everything else you need to know about the 2019 Honda Insight Hybrid. When we jump on the inside of the Honda Insight, the interior should be familiar if you're coming from a Civic, both space and more or less the layout. There are perforated leather seats up here. They are pretty similar to what we saw on the Clarity, but you do have driver and passenger power, which is something that was missing from the Canadian spec version of the Clarity. Front seats and the rear outboard seats are heated. You also get dual zone automatic climate control, but there are no rear center vents for the passengers, so it could get a little stuffy back there. I did spend a little bit of time back there when I was filming the interior of this, and I can tell you it was a little toasty without having proper airflow for the rear passengers. The infotainment is the current version of Honda's infotainment system, much newer than what was on the Clarity. You have access to Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, SiriusXM, and AT&T mobile hotspot, as well as navigation built in. You also have information about your drive and range and the power flow for the electric vehicle. The driver information screen is pretty similar to what we saw on the Clarity, has very similar information there. You can push the home button on the steering wheel to switch between the different options to have different pieces of information on the screen. Aside from that, we find pretty much the same propulsion interface to be able to switch between drive, neutral, reverse, and park. Parking brake is electronic with an auto hold. You have incandescent lights for the interior lighting, non-LED. It's a bit of a bummer, but you do have HomeLink, an auto-dimming rear mirror, and steering wheel brake paddles, which we saw on the Clarity. Now, there's one button on this vehicle that redeems me from last year. Last year, we did the 2018 Kia Niro early into 2018. And I had said at the time, it would have been nice to have an EV button to run the car in EV. And then the internet completely destroyed me, saying, why would you ever want to have an EV button on a hybrid? You can't charge the car, meaning you'll never be able to really use the car in EV mode. Well, haha, I win because the Honda Insight has that button I asked for. Is it functional? No, it's useless because you've got such a small battery. If you put the car in EV mode, even if the battery is fully charged, you're going to be able to use it in EV mode for a minute. But I am redeemed finally by having this button in the Insight. Is it functional? I mean, technically it works, but it's pretty useless. So you've got that there. You also have the Sport button and the Econ button, which we've talked about on something like the Clarity. Sport will put the car into sport mode, and then the Econ will change the profile a little bit so that there is less airflow coming out of the vents, and you also have less throttle response to be able to improve your overall fuel economy. That's the important thing about this vehicle. Let's take it on its road test, talk about how it feels on the road, and everything else you need to know about the 2019 Honda Insight. One thing I actually forgot to mention when we were doing the interior segment there is the storage compartment in the center. It is somewhat customizable. You can actually remove the dual cup holders, and there's sort of like a secondary cup holder at the bottom for, I don't know, like a big gulp. But you can slide that out of the way. There's like a little coin tray as well that you can slide forward or back. The kind of cool thing, you can also move the armrest. It is a little low as an armrest, but works well enough for a Civic, so that's something to note. But we're on our driving segment here with the Insight. It's probably going to rain in the next couple minutes because it's like the worst weather. I always complain about the winter, but now I'm complaining about the summer because it's either super humid and I am just sweating to death on the outside when I'm filming, or it's thunderstorms and massive amounts of rain, and then kind of ruins our driving segment. But we're behind the wheel of the Insight, and I, like I said, have been driving it for a little while now, a few days. I was really excited about it when I booked it because I thought, it's something different, right? It's a new version of the Insight, and I'm not disappointed, but you really have to come at this as a Civic, right? If you're looking to buy a Civic and you want to get something like the Touring, I would probably suggest going with this. It is a few $1,000s more, at least here in Canada, but you will be saving money on fuel. We haven't gone over 5 liters per 100 kilometers when we're doing our driving around here. We'll have our final fuel economy numbers at the end, including our test loop and what we did overall for the entire week. But you will save on fuel, especially if you're driving this in the city. That's where hybrids make the most sense. You get on the highway, there's nothing wrong with it. It'll still use that hybrid motor to be able to alleviate some of the energy consumption through the gas, but it's not quite as good as if you're using it in the city. And that's probably why this stupid EV button works. I don't know, if you're going in an area that maybe there's a street somewhere that is an EV only street, then you can do it. And I think that's probably why this car came with green plates on the back. I was really surprised because here in Quebec, they're very specific about which cars can actually have green plates, and it needs to be a properly fully electric car or a plug-in hybrid. But I guess Honda was able to sneak it in because it has this EV button. But I have checked the website for the transportation ministry here in Quebec, and nowhere does it list the Honda Insight as being eligible. So either, they had a vehicle that had these plates before and they just swapped it over and nobody cared, or that button does give you that option. So something to look at within your local jurisdiction to see if this vehicle would qualify. But as far as I'm concerned, it really shouldn't qualify for a green plate. But how does this vehicle perform, handle, and drive on the road? Well, much like a Civic. I mean, there's not much difference, like I said, in terms of the vehicle's setup, size, dimensions, and everything. It is very, very similar to a Honda Civic. It's comfortable enough. It's spacious enough, too, for a compact vehicle. I mean, I fit in here without any issues. I have my daughter in the back seat. She's very comfortable back there. So overall, you're getting a pretty good Civic. It has better fuel economy. Tech-wise is pretty decent as well, especially if you like things like LED lights. I do like them, and they work well enough on this type of vehicle. Tech-wise, you pretty much have everything that we saw on the Clarity. Honda does not put their blind spot monitoring, just the monitor. You push the little button or turn on the right turn signal. This screen will turn on with the camera coming off of the right side mirror to be able to show you what's going on there. So, I mean, personally, I would prefer to have blind spot monitoring instead of the blind spot monitor, but whatever, you really can't get it on this. This is about as good as this vehicle comes. There's really nothing else to it. You're looking at the fully loaded version of the Honda Insight, and for most people, I think it's going to work. I mean, if you're looking for a hybrid anyway, you probably won't even look at the Touring. You're going to be looking at the base hybrid. You get a little bit less, but ultimately, you're going to be saving more, and that's the whole point of buying a hybrid. You want to be able to maximize your savings both at the initial purchase price as well as fuel costs over the course of ownership. Now, on the inside, it's pretty quiet, right? I mean, especially if the car's running in EV mode, it's quiet enough. I find that the engine on the outside, much like the Kia Niro, has a bit of a sound to it. It doesn't sound super healthy, but that is sort of what you expect with an Atkinson cycle engine, especially a smaller one like this. So it's something that you kind of have to live with. But again, you're probably not going to be too worried about it. When you're on the inside here, you don't hear it too much. And I'm sure people on the outside of the car aren't going to care a whole lot either, especially as you drive by. It's not going to make a big difference. But personally, I have been driving this car in the Econ mode since picking it up. Like I said, it changes the throttle response a little bit and also puts the climate system in an eco mode. So it's using less air conditioning, essentially less airflow, so you can have a little bit better fuel economy. Again, another complaint that we had from the Clarity is there is no driver-only mode on this vehicle. So I actually had to manually turn off the passenger side vent because there are no vents in the back. I guess it helps a little bit, but it would be nice again to have a driver-only mode, especially since it is a automatic dual zone climate. So you should be able to turn that off. I think they should add that as an option because ultimately, if you are driving this on your own, you would like to save as much as you can when it comes to fuel economy. Now, a lot like the Niro, there isn't really a charge option to be able to charge the battery up if you want to. You're pretty much stuck with it doing everything automatically. And if you try to take your mindset out of driving a vehicle like this as a hybrid, which is the problem I have. When I'm driving either a PHEV or an electric car or a hybrid like this, I'm always working hard to get the best fuel economy possible, and I'm always looking at the fuel gauge and looking at the battery gauge. So if you drive it like a normal human being would and not worry about things like that, then you probably won't have to worry too much about whether or not it's in battery mode or it's using the gas motor, and you'll end up saving the fuel regardless. But because I'm so anal about it and I want to see how it's doing, I'm so focused on that stupid gauge that I'm like, I want to be able to charge it up and use the stupid EV mode, but I can't. So if you just let the car run and do its thing, then you should be in business. Now put it in sport mode, changes the cluster to red. Oh, you know what? That's actually not too bad. Had a little bit of traction loss there. It's pretty fun, actually. So, I mean, if you really needed to, if you have to get onto the highway and there's a truck, he's not letting you merge in, you're running out of your runway to be able to merge onto the highway, you can put the car into sport mode. But honestly, I keep this thing in eco mode the whole time because personally, I just prefer to save fuel, and I think that's going to be the big thing for people, especially if you're looking at a Civic as your next vehicle and you want maybe the touring, but you also want to save some fuel costs. This might be the option for you. Fuel economy should be top of mind when it comes to a vehicle like the Honda Insight. It did our 100 kilometer test loop in Econ mode at 4.4 liters per 100 kilometers, or 53.5 US miles per gallon, and only went up to 4.7 liters per 100 kilometers, or 50 mpg during our 800 kilometer week. Very good numbers for this vehicle, and we'll be discussing how they compare to another hybrid vehicle soon enough on an upcoming episode of Test Drive Showdown. But let's talk about the good and the bad with the 2019 Honda Insight. In our opinion, the Insight has a much nicer exterior design over the Civic sedan, and the LED exterior lighting was great during nighttime driving with this car. Front seat comfort was also very good with compared to other compact sedans that we've driven, and the standard safety technology is a win in our books, making the jump up to the touring model a decision based on comfort and not requiring more enhanced safety. However, we couldn't get excited about this car the same way we did a little while back with the Honda Clarity. It just feels like a regular hybrid is too late to the game now that plug-in hybrid technology is so good. It doesn't mean the Insight is a bad car, it just doesn't quite fit our lifestyle here at Test Drive, and I suspect that's the case for others here in our province, as we haven't spotted any other Insights on the road since picking this one up, and only one at the 3 local dealerships we went to had one parked outside. But that's a very localized observation. I feel that in other provinces a vehicle like the Insight might make more financial sense, if PHEV tax credits aren't as lucrative. Those who are shopping vehicles like this likely have done a lot of research on their own prior to buying, and those sort of personal calculations will make or break a purchase like this. If the MSRP minus any incentives plus the fuel savings over a PHEV work out to be better in the long term for your needs, a vehicle like the Insight might be a great option for you. Or if you're already looking at a top-end Civic but want something with a little better styling and better fuel economy. Which is why I won't add any true dislikes for this vehicle. While it misses out on some features from the Civic or other competing hybrids, it realistically works for the type of car that it is. My recommendation is to go with the base Insight to save a little bit more on the upfront cost, and enjoy your sub 5 liters per 100 kilometer car and the fuel savings that go along with it.